Hey everybody, welcome to tonight's Firelight Chat. Sunday nights are going to be Ask Me Anything, so let's get started. Many of you wrote in questions. I want to answer them, but also I want to talk for a couple of minutes about why we're doing this. First of all, I want you to be able to understand the issues that are important to me. The issues that I'm focused on during the campaign are the issues I would be focused on during my presidency. That's number one. You know, I've been saying to a lot of people, a presidential campaign or any political campaign is a long job interview. You're getting to know the candidate for the job. You're getting to know, to understand the agenda that matters so that there won't be any surprises. If you make me president, these are the things I will focus on to the best of my ability. But there's something else here as well. We need a complete fundamental change, not only in what happens in this country, but in how we have to ourselves think about the issues and deal with them. I think a lot of times what has happened wrong, I think represents my views, then that person will go to Washington, do what I want. And so all I have to do is show up to vote for that person every 2 years or vote for that person every 4 years. Well, what we have is a result of that kind of thinking. We have to completely expand our sense of civic activism. In order for us to have the changes that we want to have happen in this country, we have to look at politics differently. We've sort of farmed out our citizenship to a political class. That's why we are where we are. If we want a different America, if we want to shore up our democracy, save our democracy, change things, fundamentally change things, then we have to become in our generation. And remember, when I say generation, I don't just mean, boomer versus millennial versus Gen Z. I mean all of us who are adults. I don't care if you're 18 years old or you're 80 years old. I'm talking to you. And I'm asking that all of us realize we have to show up for our country now, and not just sometimes, but like every day. A lot of us have to be really geared. For instance, I'll give you an example to the state politics. So many issues now, ground zero is at your state capital. So knowing what's going on in your city council, knowing what's going on in your state government, knowing what's going on in your federal government. If the people feel, as we do, that our government has gotten away from us, we also have to take responsibility for the fact that in many ways we gave it away. So I need you to understand these issues, not only because hopefully you'll go, yeah, that's what I want to vote for, but I need you to understand these issues because in order for these things, these kinds of policies to come forth, it won't be enough to just elect a president who stands for them. The president doesn't have a magic wand. And we don't want the president to have a magic wand. That would be a dictatorship. We want we realize that the president, there's, 3 co-equal branches of government. I can promise you the things I would be standing for. But in order for these things to really take root in the consciousness and in the politics of the United States, all of us have to be involved. Okay, so let's get started. We got a lot of questions, and my team threw at me some things that they thought were most important, that were most relevant. I'm also told I shouldn't go more than 30 minutes here. I'm going to be with you every Sunday night doing this. Also, I want to point out, I hope all of you know what the Firelight program is now. So on Wednesday nights is when I'll deal with issues. And this last Wednesday, and you can see the replay of this if you like, last Wednesday, you can go to Marianne2024.com. I want to thank Billy Ray and Jake Hogan, who allowed me to interview them about the writer's strike. We've done interviews with the baristas at Starbucks. We've done interviews with Christian Small. We've done interviews with Max Alvarez. We've done interviews with the grad students at University of Michigan who are striking. So this issue of supporting labor is extremely important. Next Wednesday night, another very important topic, and that is Israel and Palestine. So Palestinian American political analyst Omar Badar, as well as political director Josh Lockman over at J Street will be with me. Once again, we all have to understand the issues. We all have to involve ourselves just by how we think about something as well as how we act. Okay, let's get started. Number one, what is the U.S. Department of Children and Youth? This person is referring, this is from JB. JB is referring to the fact that I've made it clear, and I'm glad to make it clear again here tonight, that my presidency will be focused in some very meaningful ways on children, and I'll tell you why. Remember, when our country was founded, when the institutions that are really the pillar of our civilization were first begun, women had no voice in the public realm whatsoever. And when they thought about children, they thought, oh, that's women's work. Women will handle that. So it's only historically fairly recently that women even have a voice in the public realm and in politics the way we do. So we are just forging for ourselves, not only standing for our rights, standing up with our voices, but I think in many ways, part of our, what's most important is how we handle issues around children. I have been devastated watching how, as hard as it's been and how we've worked so hard to get women elected. One of the things that's just horrifying to me right now, and believe me, I would make a big stink about it as president, is the gutting of our child labor laws. What people had to go through in this country to establish child labor laws, there are people who are gutting them. And listen to this. You want to hear bad news? The 2 states where the governors have signed legislation gutting child labor laws, the governors are both women. Sarah Huckabee Sanders in Arkansas and Kim Reynolds in Iowa. What do you even say to that? Well, as president, I will not be signing laws that make it more difficult for children. Really what they're trying to do here, this is so sinister. What they're doing is they are exploiting these unaccompanied minors. That's what they're doing. Shame on them. There is such a thing as healthy shame. So, having said that, we have some big problems when it comes to our children. We have the highest child poverty rate of any advanced democracy. We have 1 million kids in America who go to school even though they are homeless. When it comes to nutritional factors, when it comes to educational factors, when it comes to chronic diseases, we have a higher rate of chronic illnesses among our children. So I want a massive transfer of focus and resources on children under the age of 10. If you want to have an amazing society 20 years from now, if you want to have an amazing economy 20 years from now, we focus more on children under the age of 10, but really going all through, obviously, all the way to 18. But the early years, we know things about the early years now that we didn't even know, even 10 years ago, about the brain of a child, early childhood. This is why we should have free childcare. This is why we should have free nursery schools. It's just outrageous. Preschool. We know about the brain of a child. It's all in there. And so what's happening in America today, so much of what we talk about is how too many people, a majority of American people, are actually locked out of the great engine of prosperity that makes life quite wonderful for people within 20% of our economy. Some of these children are locked out before the age of 10. If a child goes to a school where they don't even have the resources to teach a child to read, then the chances of that child by 8, definitely by 10, but even by 8, if that child cannot learn to read by that age, the chances of high school graduation are drastically decreased, and the chances of incarceration are drastically increased. That's just not okay with me. And just like John Kennedy said, within 10 years, we'll land a man on the moon. I want my goal to be that within 10 years, every public school in America will be a palace of learning and culture and the arts. So you're going to have a woman in the White House and at that desk, a different desk. That's a whole different topic at the Oval Office, who is concentrating a lot on the state of America's children. How would you address the climate crisis should you get elected? I would declare an emergency. I would declare a climate emergency. On day one, I would cancel the Willow Project. We have a president now. President Biden has given more oil drilling permits even than Trump did. Plus, he approved the Willow Project. I don't know what people are thinking. Look what we're going through right now. People even having trouble breathing the air in certain cases on the east coast of the United States because of the wildfires in Canada. Did you read about the dead fish today that are, just being thrown onto the shores in Texas because once the heat got a certain level in the ocean that there wasn't enough oxygen. I mean, I don't know how many more warning signs. I mean, it's not even like what's coming, it's what's already here. So this is not a time to be ramping up fossil fuel extraction. This is a time to be ramping down fossil fuel extraction. A lot of people say, well, how will you work with Congress? Well, obviously, I hope if you're interested in this campaign, you need to not only work hard on the primary level to get me in there, but work hard on the primary level on your congressional candidates. All of you have a congressional candidate because that's every 2 years. Well, one of my favorite quotes from Lincoln is there's not that much evil, he said, any government could do as long as the people remain vigilant. He was speaking there specifically about the fact that every 2 years you can replace your congressperson. Theoretically, we know the problems now. We know the obstructions. We know the gerrymandering issues, and so forth. But we all have to work on this. This is our democracy. This is our country that we're talking about, and this is our future. So hopefully I'll have a House, I'll have a Senate that wants to go along, but there's a lot I can do either way. Once again, as president, I can cancel the Willow Project. I can refuse to give those permits, those drilling permits, and I can declare a climate emergency. Get me in there. We are going to do that. The next question says, how realistic is it that the U.S. could implement a national health care system? You and I get to decide how realistic it is. Hello. Once again, you're going to have to give me, not just the White House. You're going to have to work hard to get the progressives into the House and into the Senate. Give me a Democratic Senate and a Democratic House, and we're going to get universal health care. We will get a Medicare for all. Somebody says, would you approve of D.C. statehood and Puerto Rico statehood? Well, definitely D.C. statehood. Puerto Ricans should make the decision whether they want D.C. statehood. That should be up to them. If they want statehood, I absolutely support it. Some wish to remain a free associated state within a commonwealth. Some want independence. Once again, it should be the Puerto Ricans themselves that decide. There are about 4 million people living in Puerto Rico and 8 million Puerto Ricans on the continent of the North American continent, which is pretty fascinating. Also, somebody has mentioned here that it is today the Puerto Rican Day Parade in New York. I'm in London doing grandmother duty. My first grandchild, Elizabeth, was born. But if I was in New York today, I would definitely be at the Puerto Rico Day Parade, which I remember from the times I've lived in New York is one of the most fun ones there. How do we stop Republicans from enacting harmful policies at the state level like book bans? That's from Grandpa Josie. Listen, everybody, you've got to get involved on your state level. And you know what you do? You sue them. You sue them for civil rights infractions. That's what's already starting to happen in states like Florida. But once again, this is what I'm saying. You've got to get involved on your state level. And also somebody else was saying, write new books. But, there are people who are on the internet and are actually listing some of the books that are being banned. It's like some of the great American classics, like To Kill a Mockingbird. And of course, it's particularly sinister when some of these books are being written that really do explain to our children the history of our country. You've got to all get involved. We've got to all get involved. And that means a lot on these state levels. If a problem, because I can't, as president on the federal level, say, Florida, you can't do that. But if you live in Florida, you can, and you can be involved, and I hope you will be. Also, I want to say something else about these state positions. A lot of times I remember I was on a Zoom with some young woman, and she said, Marianne, how can we help pressure these elected officials? And I remember saying to her, don't think in terms of how you can pressure them. Think in terms of how you can replace them. We're past, this is why I'm running. Influence them. No. Some of these people just need to be replaced. Think of running, particularly if you're a young person. But even if you're not a young person, just think about electoral politics. Electoral politics is not the be-all and end-all only answer. We've got to take an inside-outside approach. Labor is so important. Traditional political activism is so important. You getting involved on any level is important, but electoral politics is important too. So ask yourself, do I feel in my heart? Say to yourself, maybe I'll run, or at the very least get involved in campaigns. Not all of us are meant to run as candidates, but you probably, there might be something for you to do within a campaign, which is kind of more fun and interesting than you probably think. Josie says, what are your plans for dealing with abortion rights? Well, why weren't they codified before? They could have been codified Obama said he was going to do it. And when the Democrats had those 2 years with House, Senate, and White House, they could have done it. Get rid of the filibuster. So what we have to do, once again, please give me the House and the Senate. Give me the White House, but give the Democrats the House and the Senate, and then get rid of the filibuster and codify Roe v. Wade. One of the things that we will be doing with the Firelight Chats is we're going to have, I don't know if it's going to be in a couple weeks or a little bit after that, some of these women who have had some terrible experiences that are happening because there are medical things, medical emergencies. The doctor says, you need to have an emergency abortion here. I can't do it. It's now illegal. Terrible things are already starting to happen in exactly the ways that we warned. This one says, what are you going to do to ensure LGBTQ rights don't go the way of Roe v. Wade? Codify special protection. Yeah, I can't even believe we're having this conversation that we need to. But we have, you've heard Clarence Thomas say, well, we know we decided Roe v. Wade wrongly. I think maybe we decided marriage equality wrongly too. That's dog whistle. That's warning. So it's a very legitimate question to be asking. I would definitely, as soon as I got into the White House, I would definitely be giving special protection status to transgender Americans. And I would be directing the Department of Justice to vigorous investigation and prosecution of civil rights violations regarding not only transgender, but any LGBTQIA American. Continue to advocate for the ERA, absolutely. Executive power to ensure discrimination for housing against, when LGBTQ or anyone is discriminated when it comes to housing, when it comes to jobs, when it comes to schools and stuff. I'm on it, I promise you. And so would my DOJ. Do you plan on attending more colleges and universities during your campaigns? Yes, can't wait. As soon as it's September, I will be out there, and definitely be in touch with us at the campaign. If you go to a particular university or college where you think it would be a good idea for me to go, but particularly if you are in New Hampshire, South Carolina, Georgia, Nevada, Michigan, any place really. I was talking to some people from Florida earlier tonight on the volunteer call. But by all means, I will be out there, and please give us any information if you know of some college you go to, someone you love goes to, and can help us get there. What made you go into politics? Well, I have always been interested. I've always been active. I've always voted. I've always supported the campaigns of the people. I come from that generation. Remember, I was out there, protesting the war. When I was in high school, I was working on the Eugene McCarthy campaign, and then was getting very excited about Bobby Kennedy. And I remember the night of his death, and the tragedy that was for all of us. As my career developed, I found that my work, being up close and personal with people's issues from a spiritual, psychological issue of personal transformation, higher consciousness, spirituality, was the way that I felt that I could best serve. And I have had a very meaningful career. But I started seeing something change. My career began about 40 years ago. And around 20 years ago, I saw something begin to change. I would say that when my career began in the 1980s, I would say that as a general rule in this country, if you met somebody whose life was in trouble, the test results had come back and it was a life-challenging illness, or somebody got in a divorce, or bankruptcy, or their child was addicted, or they were addicted, or the things that happen in people's lives. There was the sense that that was the exception and not the rule. And one of the things I began to realize about 20 years ago is that there's this ubiquitous despair. I began to realize that a certain kind of anxiety, and we see it now, of course, with the mental health crisis, a certain level of anxiety seems to be a feature of the American experience. And I began to realize that a lot of this had to do with bad public policy. A lot of it was because people didn't have health care. A lot of it was because people had to work 2 and 3 jobs. A lot of it was because people couldn't send their kids to college or have these terrible college loans. Remember, I grew up at a time when we still had a thriving middle class in this country. So in the 1970s, the average American worker could afford a house, could afford a car, could afford a yearly vacation. One parent could afford to stay home, and they could afford to send their kids to college. That was in the 1970s. Somebody was telling me, I can't remember who it was. Oh, I had dinner with a friend last night, and she was telling me that she grew up in a family in Cleveland. Her father was a pipe fitter. Her mother, she said, cleaned houses. They had 6 children, I think, and her parents were able to send all 6 of them to private Catholic school. Would that be possible today? So there has been, over the last 50 years, this massive transfer of wealth, $50 trillion, into the hands of 1% of Americans. And it has created a billionaire class that didn't used to exist. And it has also been this massive accumulation of wealth at the expense of the common good, the public sector. And this is why, even though they have universal health care and every other advanced democracy, even though in every other advanced democracy they have, tuition-free or near tuition-free college and universities and tech schools, which, by the way, we had in this country. We had in this country until the 1960s and 70s. Anyway, you get me in there. And I'm not saying overnight it's all going to be fixed. No, I'm not. But you will have a visceral sense that we have begun a U-turn. That's what that 4 years is going to be. We're going to start turning this ship around. Like I've said here tonight, all of us have to be part of this in our own way. But you will have a sense that it's happening. And you'll have a sense that a woman's in the Oval Office who's doing everything all day, every day to make sure it does. Do you support... so that's why I got into politics. I realized that you can help a person heal their own individual life. But if these larger dynamics, social and economic dynamics, continue to push people down, then it's not going to be enough to just deal with individual issues. I heard someone once say, and I've quoted it in one of my books, no amount of private charity. And that was another thing I've been very involved with, founding, nonprofit organizations and so forth, which are important, but no amount of private charity can compensate for a basic lack of social justice. Do you support increasing nuclear energy production as a carbon-free alternative to fossil fuel? Joe Ray asked that. Some of you are not going to like this answer. My answer is no. Now, for those of you who don't like the answer, you might be saying, she's so uneducated about the technology. We have the technology now. It can be safe. It's not like I don't understand that. It's not the technology that I don't trust. It's people. When you look at plane crashes, for instance, the vast majority of plane crashes are human error. It's humanity to hold that power. So I don't feel we need it. We can do this with green energy. If we make the kind of investments that we need to make, we can do it. So that's why I'm not for nuclear power. And I know that that's controversial. I know some of you don't agree with me on that, but I just think it's too risky. I understand, not because of the technology, and also because of the environmental issues these days. Okay, how do you feel about legalizing psychedelic mushrooms? Yes, but be careful. What are your foreign policy plans for Mexico and Latin America? How would you handle the cartels? You know, people talk about the crisis on the border. The main crisis is the humanitarian crisis. You know, and by the way, even those who politically talk about the crisis on the border, they talk about the crisis on the border as a distraction technique so that they don't have to talk about the real crisis, which is that 85 million Americans are underinsured or uninsured. The fact that people have to work 2 and 3 jobs, that's a crisis. The fact that our water's not safe to drink in too many cases, that's a crisis. The fact that people can't get to school. There's so many crises. So this whole southern crisis at the southern border. But the point that I mainly want to make is that it's called immigration, by the way, which is not a crisis in and of itself, okay? The crisis is these horrifying circumstances that people are seeking to escape. I think we all want to think how dangerous your circumstances have to be that you are willing, with little children no less, to make a very dangerous journey across desert to get to America where things might be better. So first of all, can we please go into our hearts on this? And if you are descended from slaves, or you are descended from, or if you are an indigenous Native American, then this is not true. But anyone else, who the hell do you think your grandparents and great-grandparents and other ancestors were? They were coming here with the same level of desperation, and they found in America a place of refuge. Asylum is sacrosanct. Now, this is the next issue. The average American does not realize, it is my impression, that the average American does not realize the part that U.S. foreign policy has played in Latin America over the last 50 years that has so exacerbated some of these situations. We have sided with some really bad guys because they weren't communists or they weren't socialists or whatever. And they, in many times, maybe they weren't those things, but they were playing with these really bad people, the whole thing with the drug cartels, etc. The drug war, this is not working. This is not working. We're better off. I'll tell you something, we could take the money, the billions and billions and millions that we spend on the drug war right now and do a kind of Latin American Marshall Plan. Because ultimately, like I said, what's happening at the border is the symptom, not the cause. We have to address the cause. And that is the level of despair in some of these countries where the money would be better spent in helping these local economies, these local communities, to be places where people would feel safe to be. What is your stand on prayer in school? Well, that was a Supreme Court decision. I think it was a good thing. And I don't think that it was the Lord's Prayer doesn't insult. I mean, I'm Jewish. There's nothing in the Lord's Prayer that offends a Jew. There's nothing in there. There's no specific reference to Jesus in the Lord's Prayer. And if someone comes from a family that is atheistic or agnostic and they don't feel like doing the Lord's Prayer, they certainly shouldn't feel coerced to do so. It could just be that moment of silence. But that was a Supreme Court decision. It's not something that I would have control over. It's important that we remember, though, that the freedom of religion is not only the freedom to worship as you wish, but whether or not you wish. So the freedom of religion is also the freedom to not have any religious worship at all. So we want to respect that as well. Respect for the atheist, respect for someone who's not into any of that. How do you, would you consider, pesticides? What will you do about pesticides on our fruits, vegetables, chemicals in our food? There is a matrix of corporate power that I'm sure you've heard me talk about, the corporatocracy. Insurance companies, pharmaceutical companies, big food companies, big agricultural companies, big chemical companies, gun manufacturers, big oil companies and defense contractors. They run this country. And it's a form of tyranny at this point. And chemical companies are some of the worst. And the not just the toxins, the carcinogens in some of our food. This person is asking about the pesticides. I would do everything within my power in terms of the EPA, in terms of the FDA, Food and Drug, Environmental Protection. I would fight Monsanto. I would do everything possible. I would use everything, use the power of the executive branch to push back against these companies who, by the way, knowingly do this. There have been things recently about DuPont and others, chemical companies who knew about the danger of these forever chemicals. They knew, just like some of these oil companies we now know, knew the dangers. This is what happens when you have this hyper-capitalistic perspective. They call it hyper-capitalism. It means capitalism without a soul, capitalism that has lost its moral center and just puts its own short-term profit maximization goals before any consideration for health, well-being, and safety of people and planet. The government is supposed to be the advocate for the people, and our government, in too many cases, because of the undue influence, financial influence of these companies on our Congress, the government is either, chopping wood and carrying water for these industries, or trying to have it both ways. I wouldn't even be trying to have it both ways. My goal would be to make them squirm. Okay. How do you handle people who have issues with your religious views? I don't think people have issues with my religious views. I think people have issues with what they have been made to believe are my religious views. My religious views are actually pretty traditional. We should love one another. We should forgive. We should seek to be compassionate. We should walk with mercy and humility. If you have a problem with that, vote for someone else. So many working people of low income are limited in the type of housing they can afford. What would you do? Well, first of all, I would seek to make it impossible for Wall Street to do what they're doing now, which is making housing a commodity. It's just terrible, actually. If you look at my Economic Bill of Rights, which is Marianne 24, you will see that guaranteed housing is part of what I have there. I want a mass mobilization effort, a kind of like Habitat for Humanity, Civilian Corps, Civilian Conservation Corps that Franklin Roosevelt had. We have 600,000 homeless people in this country. We have 500,000 vacant homes. So that's there's a lot that we can do. What we need is the political will to do it. I'm being told I should shut this down soon. And we're going to be here every Sunday night, remember. So, you know what? There are more here, but we'll do more on next Sunday night. I hope that this was a good beginning for you. Somebody's saying, would you want to make lobbying illegal? Well, there's also lobbying for good things. There's lobbying for anti-poverty legislation. There's citizens lobbying to give housing to the homeless. There's lobbying, anti-hunger lobbying. So the issue is not lobbying itself. The issue is corporate lobbying, where the lobbying comes with the very strong implication that if this or that legislator does not vote the way the lobbyist is suggesting, it doesn't even need to be said how much money will be spent by that company or by that industry to make sure that that legislator is defeated in their next primary. And that's what has made our government in many ways a system of legalized bribery. The answer to that is that ultimately we need a constitutional amendment that will make all federal campaigns public. That's what we ultimately need. That's the only way we're going to override the undue influence of money on our political system. So I think that it's obvious that we need a fundamental change. What we're doing right now is we're all just, we're playing whack-a-mole, trying to fight here, trying to fight there, trying to fight here, trying to fight there. We need a political revolution. We need a peaceful revolution. John F. Kennedy said, those who make a peaceful revolution impossible make a violent revolution inevitable. A peaceful revolution that begins in our hearts, that we love this country, that we begin to see that our love of this country and our love of humanity necessitates, and our love of the earth necessitates that we rise up now. That we realize it's not just about us as individuals. Not just about me, it's about we. Not just about my children, it's about everybody's children. Not just about my home, it's about the earth itself, that is the home we share. And this generation will be remembered. It will be remembered either as a generation that at the 11th hour woke up and turned this thing around, or it will be remembered with a, what could they possibly have been thinking? Other generations have had hard times. I'm sure that abolitionists thought, we can't get this done. Women's suffragists thought, we can't get this done. The early labor movement, we can't get this done. Civil rights movement, we can't get this done. There would have been desperate days. But in every single case, they got it done. And the way I look at it, it's our turn now, because in many ways, what we're dealing with is just another iteration, the latest iteration of the same type of energies that were with us from the beginning. Remember, it's baked into the cake in this country. On one hand, we are based on the most enlightened principles of equality, of opportunity, inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And at the same time, we have always, from the very beginning, been filled with some forces who, for their own economic and ideological purposes, had no intention of seeing that happen, and would go to even violent ends to make sure that it didn't. Remember, 41 signers of the 56 people who signed the Declaration of Independence were themselves slave owners. So nothing new is really going on here. This aristocratic, oppressive mentality, it's gone on before. Other generations handled it, and it's our turn now. I appreciate you being here. I hope I will see you on Wednesday night on all my social media channels, talking about Israel and Palestine with Omar Badar and Josh Lockman at 6 p.m. And then next Sunday night at 6 p.m., I'll be back here with Ask Me Anything. If you think this campaign is making sense to you, if it makes sense in your mind, it makes sense in your heart, please donate. Go to Marianne2024.com. Please consider donating monthly, even if $5 a month, $10, $15. You can go from $2 up to $6,600. It means everything so that we can continue, so that we can be in there, and so we can take it all the way. Thank you. Thank you so much. God bless you. Have a beautiful night. Bye-bye.